So apart from sexual assault, there's been a number of increasing in stabbings, fights and other violence reported in schools. Some of the incidents have been fatal. The question is, though, why are pupils so violent? Let's find out from clinical psychologist Gerard Labaskakni. He joins us in the studio. Thanks for your time. Appreciate it. We were discussing this in our newsroom the other day. A 14-year-old pupil accused of stabbing another pupil. Why is it so easy for a 14-year-old to be so violent in this day and age?
Look, I think if you have to look compared to the rest of society, it's still not children who are the day-to-day violent offenders. But we have to accept that schools are a microcosm of our broader society. So if we have a very violent society, it's not really that difficult to understand why we're going to have violence in our schools taking place at a higher rate than we would like. But I think what we really need to focus on is perhaps how do we prevent this from happening? We're never going to stop violence in its entirety from occurring in our schools. So it's a bit of a false kind of pathway to go down that pathway. And rather look at how do we try and pick it up early as possible to prevent violence from happening and not taking reactive steps saying, we're going to have harsh punishments for children who engage in violent acts. That doesn't really help. I mean, it's after the fact. It's not preventative. And having, for example, a zero-tolerance attitude often just means people are scared to report stuff because if they're wrong, they're afraid that someone might get into trouble and then get kicked out of the school.
Yeah.
So we can't have a punitive attitude. We actually have a preventative attitude.
Yeah. So let's talk about the psychology behind this and whether a child's personality is molded at home or in school, given the circumstances they face in those environments. How does that work?
Now, again, it's the nature versus nurture argument. I mean, you will get just some kids who are bad kids. They would have grown up in the perfect environment, two parents present, attention, you name it, but they will still end up as bad kids. And of course, there are definitely those who are affected by their environment. I wouldn't so much say, per se, the school environment is probably going to have a greater impact on what's going on at home. And not necessarily the parent's fault, but is this person in a single-parent household where the parent has to wake up early, leave early in the morning for work, come back late in the evening from work, and there's not really that proper supervision taking place. The child is obviously only at school for a certain period of time, and that's often where the things slip through the gap.
Yeah. So I mean, it's difficult for me to even kill a roach, for instance, to tramp on something because it irks me so much. But you have 14-year-olds who are allegedly stabbing another human being. Yeah. What sort of help do they need to actually sort them out or reset the way they see the world and how they act in the world?
Yeah. Well, what I always like to say to people is that it's almost very rare that you'd get, without any precursor, without any history leading up to that event, suddenly someone just randomly stabbing another student. So my concern is what was happening beforehand that we could have and should have picked up when the problem, or when the problematic child is in still a smaller stage, when things aren't reaching the level of wanting to stab someone, and trying to figure out what's going on, where do the deficits lie? Is it an issue of mental health? Is it an issue of a bad personality that's developing? Is it an issue of stresses that are going on in that kid's life, substance abuse? And if we address those issues, you reduce the risk of this person acting out in a violent way later on. So if you implement not a punitive program, but rather a preventative program, which actually helps detect these people as early as possible, you're helping that person by not doing something late. And of course, you're helping the potential victims. And that's a win-win for everybody. But if you purely have this attitude of, we're going to kick these kids out of school, we're going to come down on them like a ton of bricks, that's really not going to help very much. And that's why I get very frustrated when I see things like, people saying, we're going to have more police around our schools. Well, these people are in the school.
Yeah.
They have a legitimate reason to be present. Or, we must arm teachers, which is perhaps the most ludicrous argument I've heard in a long time. What are we doing to pick these things up as early as possible, get these people the necessary attention that they need, whether it's mental health, whether it's substance abuse, whether it's other family-related issues that intervene there, and that is the best way to try and reduce these things from getting to the point where we have kids stabbing each other.
So how easy is it to actually pick up those personality traits that you mentioned that you should be looking out for? And also, what's the school's responsibility in terms of having a guidance class, which I had when I was growing up? I mean, is that something that can be picked up in a class like that?
Absolutely. I mean, as I said, there's almost always a history. If we, for example, jump quickly back to the 2008 Krugersdorp sword attack, where the young matric boy went to school with a sword, killed one student, and injured another student and two laborers. There were warning signs. This kid was telling people up to a year before, repeatedly, he's going to go to school and kill people. The Friday before the incident, which happened on the Monday, he again sat down with his group of friends and said, Monday, I'm going to bring a sword and kill people. Monday, he arrives with a sword. People still don't do anything. So again, that's an extreme example, but typically there are clear warning signs, not sort of this hindsight is really wonderful kind of vision. clear warning signs that this kid's walking down a path that is beyond what we would expect from kids who are going through difficulties in school. It's beyond the norm, and those things are not difficult to pick up. The next phase gets into who should be responsible for then taking a closer look and seeing what, in other words, doing the actual assessment. And we can't expect teachers to do that. Teachers can be our warning signs, other pupils can be our warning signs, but then it needs to really get escalated to someone who has the necessary skills and expertise on a district level, perhaps, to really go and do a threat assessment and determine what's the problem here and what needs to be done to manage that problem.
All right. Thank you so much for your time and your insight. Appreciate it. That was clinical psychologist Gerard Labuschagne.